Hi, everyone. I just want to preface by saying I'm usually someone who listens to other people's stories. I'm not really someone who, I guess, speaks and tells my story or tells much about my personal life. So I'm just grateful for you all to be here today to listen to me because I'm usually the listener, and I think that's partly because of the events that I'm going to explain in this talk today. So I was your typical high school student, a bit of an overachiever, but I wouldn't say that I was setting the world on fire. I had good grades. I was president of National Honor Society, Eagle Scout, drumline captain, but like most high school seniors, I couldn't wait to graduate. I had finished my first semester of senior year and was down the home stretch. That's when cancer came out of nowhere and slapped me right across the face and turned my life upside down. When I think of cancer, I usually think of older people. You don't really think of younger people having cancer, let alone teenagers. So here I was, a teenager who had cancer. Everyone told me throughout my cancer treatment that I was super strong and powerful, but I didn't really feel powerful. I felt like I had no choice but to be strong. I realized that throughout my hardships, the decisions I made became harder and harder the further I got from my diagnosis and eventually my cancer treatment. I realized that the true testament to your strength are the decisions you make throughout your hardships. Do you let them consume you, or do you consume them? According to Stupid Cancer, one of the leading organizations in bringing awareness to adolescent and young adult cancer treatments, 89,500 adolescents and young adults are diagnosed with cancer each year. So while it seems like this is a small group of people that are being diagnosed with cancer each year, it's really a large group of people. The day of my diagnosis was the hardest day of my life. I had previously had what I thought at the time was a cyst on my head. I'd had surgery to remove it, and like any other doctor's appointment, my mom and I went to go and get the stitches removed. So it started out like any other day. We went in, and the surgeon removed the stitches. Then he sat my mother and I down and told me something that changed my life forever. What he said was, well, what we found on your head was not a pilar cyst, but it was in fact a round, blue cell malignant tumor. At least that's what I heard. What my mom heard was, your son has cancer. So in one single instant, I went from worrying about my college applications and getting them in on time to thinking, am I gonna die? How am I gonna fight this? Can I fight this? Why me? Are you kidding me? I then made preparations to see an oncologist. And to be honest, I didn't know what an oncologist was before this. Turns out that means that's a cancer doctor. So I made preparations to see an oncologist, and throughout this time, I was still going to school, and none of my classmates knew that I'd be leaving school for good very, very soon. My oncologist determined that I would have to have another surgery, followed by 6 months of chemotherapy, followed by several rounds of radiation. So while this seems excessive and like it's a lot, to me, this all seemed like a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer for me to leave school. Honestly, I was tired of it anyways. It was a no-brainer for me to have surgery. I wanted to make sure all of the cancer was gone, and it was a no-brainer for me to have chemotherapy. Everyone told me that it would be incredibly hard and difficult, but to be honest with you, I felt like, look, it can't be so bad if I'm just tired each day. It was all a no-brainer to me, and it was all happening so fast. I didn't know how to feel about any of it. I just wanted to live. During the midst of my cancer, I would get stuck with a needle in my chest every single day, sometimes multiple times. I would get so many bags of drugs each day pumped into my veins, whether it would just be IV or anti-nausea meds or chemotherapy. At first, I was just feeling tired, so it didn't feel like it was that bad. But eventually, I began having to juggle between nausea and fatigue, and I was struggling to not vomit each and every day. This would usually last 6 to 9 hours each day, so almost like a 9 to 5. So while some of you would have your 9 to 5 jobs going into the office, my 9 to 5 was going into the hospital, getting pumped with chemo drugs. Some of these drugs had crazy names like doxorubicin or cyclophosphamide or vincristine, so it was cool that I got to learn different names of these drugs. In addition to all this, I also had to plan to be awake during certain times. I had to plan to be awake for nurses, doctors, and other healthcare professionals that would come in, because they were worrying about me, and I knew that they were really nice, and I was grateful for them, but all of this was exhausting. And saying that this was exhausting is an understatement. I eventually began to feel incredibly angry at myself. Angry at myself for getting cancer, and angry at the world for moving on without me. I felt like I was in purgatory, like I was disconnected from the rest of the world. One day when I got a virus, which is pretty common for people going through chemotherapy, you become susceptible to cold and viruses, and you can't fight them off, so you have to stay inpatient at the hospital overnight. I ended up staying inpatient, and I met this other young adult cancer patient like me. He'd been dealing with this cancer for 6 years, and he was in so much more pain than I was, yet he was cheerful. Doctors would walk in solemnly and leave with smiles on their faces. He had a way of making their loads lighter. He had every reason to be rageful and angry, but instead he had fun. He was positive with the people around him, and he enjoyed life. He loved life even though he was unable to leave his bed. In a way, he had so much more life than people that are free to travel the entire world. He didn't just have life, he gave people other life. We soon became close friends, and he taught me that I didn't need to be angry at myself. While my anger was valid, I didn't need to just feel anger. I could be positive, and I could look at my situation in a different way. I could be compassionate towards myself and towards other people. I could choose a different approach. So I did. I became positive to those around me, and I became compassionate towards other people. I became joyful. Every day I was getting chemo in bed, and although it was exhausting, I tried to stay positive, because to me this was more fun, honestly, rather than being angry. As a result, I was chosen to be a graduation speaker for 80 other high school seniors that were graduating high school that year, that had either previously been getting treatment at the same hospital as me or were currently receiving treatment. So this was a huge deal that I was speaking. In addition to this, I was also chosen to be a brand ambassador for Stop and Shop for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month in September 2019. So if you were ever in Stop and Shop in September 2019 in New Jersey, New York, or Connecticut, there's a chance that you saw my picture in the store. I became grateful for everyone around me and everything around me. Instead of being angry towards myself, I became compassionate towards other people. This was the first step in changing my outlook, but there were more obstacles to come. During the summer of 2019, Instagram and social media became my enemy. I would scroll social media while I was in bed, still receiving chemo, and I would just see so many of my former high school friends having fun at the beach and getting excited for graduation. And while I was excited for graduation, and I got to graduate high school, fortunately, I felt like I wasn't really going anywhere in life. People were moving on to the next stage of life, and all I was doing was moving from nausea and vomiting and chemo towards radiation and getting a laser stuck through my head. I had to take a gap year because of this, and it honestly became the best decision for me because this way I found Connecticut College, the best school for me. After receiving all my treatments, I ended up with a large radiated wound on my head, which needed to heal. So again, this gap year was necessary. I began many wound healing treatments where a nurse would dress my wound every day, and this constantly was supposed to fuel the wound and get it to heal really a lot faster. I also spent time in this thing called a hyperbaric chamber, where each day I got to lay in it and breathe 100% oxygen for 2 hours each day. This was actually pretty cool because I got to binge watch a lot of Netflix shows in it. I got to binge watch Ozark, and honestly, I started and then finished all of BoJack Horseman in the hyperbaric chamber. Around this time, I was also getting ready for another plastic surgery that I was expecting right before going to con. And I was really excited because I'm thinking, okay, finally, now's my chance to finish all my cancer journey and go through the next stage of life. So this was really exciting for me. Unfortunately, this was also the time that the COVID-19 pandemic hit. All the elective surgeries in New York City became postponed until further notice. This included my surgery. Although to me, my surgery didn't feel elective. It felt necessary. The surgery was supposed to move a part of my head that had hair onto the radiated wound and remove all the wound tissue. This would help me to look normal. That's all I wanted, was to look normal and like my pre-cancer self again. So even though it was incredibly long and grueling, I did all that I could. All I could do was hold out hope. I held out hope for May, which was when I was supposed to have my surgery. No sign of surgery. Then I held out hope for June. No sign of surgery. And this was so grueling, and I was so angry. My parents can even attest to that. They knew that I was upset as hell during these 2 months. But when July came, I finally got my wish. I was able to have surgery, and although I still had to heal a little bit when school started, I was able to go to school. This was crucial because I wanted to go to school in person. Although most people decided they wanted to go to school online because of the pandemic, I had to go to school in person because I hadn't had human interaction since 2018. My only friends were my parents. I really hadn't interacted with anyone my age in a school setting since before cancer. When I started school, my first year was challenging, partly because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also partly because I was terribly out of practice with interacting with people my own age. During my first year, I was incredibly anxious, also because I had another surgery coming up for the summer. My whole goal, even throughout college, was I wanted to look normal again. This idea of I wanted to look like how I did before, and I hated how I looked. I couldn't even look in the mirror. So I was so close to looking normal again. When the summer came, you can imagine my excitement when I was able to have this next surgery. What the surgery would do is they would insert a silicone expander into my head and then wait for a few weeks for it to heal, and then they would expand the silicone expander for about 3 months, and then they would remove it. Then they would be able to move the skin over my head and be able to cover the rest of the scars and wounds on my head. So you can imagine my excitement when I had finally had this expander inserted into my head. Everything was falling into place, and I would finally look normal again. Things would finally be like how they were, and I could move on with my life. Unfortunately, this did not happen. My dream shattered when, after only 2 weeks, my wound broke, and although it was able to heal, the silicone expander had to be removed in fear of the wound getting infected. I felt like everything had failed. Everything I'd been waiting for months, years, was done. I blamed myself for the cancer, for not having friends, for the failed surgery. I blamed myself for everything. I got really, really depressed. I felt like I would look like a freak forever, and that nothing would come from any of this. For the rest of my life, I would be a freak. Then sophomore year started, and things began to turn around. I decided to make an effort to get out of my bubble and to meet other people and show compassion towards others and to myself. I began to make a lot more friends than I previously had, and I began to feel good about myself. I realized that my life didn't have to revolve around cancer, and that cancer didn't have to ruin my life. Who I am isn't defined by how I look or how I want to look. After getting straight A's and working really hard in school and making many, many more friends than I previously had, I realized how much that I can personally change and that I have a choice in how I define myself. And all of you do too. The hardships you have don't have to be a burden upon all of you. You can redefine them, and you don't have to let your hardships define who you are. Because of my cancer experience, I realize now that I can help other cancer survivors who are young adults take their burdens and use them to boost themselves and other people. So I urge you all today to take your hardships, whatever they may be, and use them to empower you to help other people's lives and help better their lives. Ultimately, this will make your own personal lives much, much better. Thank you.